The House Education Committee will come to order. Will the clerk please take attendance?
Chair Colazar.
Here.
Representative Churches.
Present.
Shannon. That's fixed it. Representative Shannon.
Present.
Stone. Weiss. Glanville.
Present.
Conlon. Edwards.
Present.
Wagella.
Here.
Green.
Here.
Markkinen.
Here.
Paquette.
Here.
Wenzel.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Representative Glanville moves to approve the minutes of the October 3rd committee without objection, so ordered. So today we will be taking testimony from superintendents from small and rural schools. And as a representative of a very populated suburban area, I'm very interested to hear about when I look at my school districts, I've got, the Plymouth Canton Park, which has 6,000 students on one big high school campus. I've got Northville, whose graduating class, I believe, was around 700. And then we've got Livonia, which is also one of the largest districts with 3 high schools, several middle schools, and a ton of elementaries. So I know for my purposes, I'm very interested to see the other side of the coin and what that looks like. So I would welcome everybody to come on up, and we will get started. And just so the committee knows, we're going to let everybody kind of go through, and then we'll take questions after that. So whenever you're ready.
All right. Thank you. I'm Matt Schuler. I'm the Director of Government Relations for the Michigan Association of Superintendents and Administrators. So we represent over 500 public school superintendents. And today with us, we have a small and rural task force that our association has started to really kind of get at issues that small and rural districts face. And so we have 4 superintendents up here with us to kind of talk about their district and to talk about some of the challenges and some of the opportunities that they have in their districts. We're happy to take any questions. And Stephanie Long, do you want to get started?
Sure, thank you. Hi, my name is Stephanie Long. I'm the superintendent in Leland Public School, which is in Leelanau County, north of Traverse City. We're a small little district. We're a 1-building, 450 student entire district under one roof. One of the concerns that we've talked about quite a bit in a smaller district is the number of people that we have available to us to do the work that is required by the state of Michigan. In my building, we have 1 superintendent, that's myself. I have 1 K-12 principal and 1 business manager, and that's the entirety of our business office. That's all of the staff that I have to do any of the work that needs to get done. And one of the things that I really just wanted to talk about was the really time-consuming and burdensome process of applying for state funding grants. Super grateful for the allocations. Really could not function without them. Things like at-risk dollars or 31N money or any of the other numbered lettered pots of money that are out there. One of the things that I wanted to just show you is this is one of our state aid receipts, and you'll notice that this is just the month of August, and these are all the different ways money comes into our school. Every one of these is a different pot of money. There are 21 of them listed. 8 of them require individual applications and individual reporting and monitoring reports that go with those. I'm going to just read you a really quick list of gobbledygook letters. Every one of these that I'm about to read to you is a different reporting system or platform that the state requires us to be able to use. MEGS Plus, Nexus, MyKIP, GEMS, MARS, Catamaran, PCG, MyLogin, MOEX, CEPI, ORS, EEM, FID, REP, SID, Sigma, MICE, and MIND. Nonsense, right? Yes. Every single one of those is a different platform. Every single one of them requires different administrative permissions, which requires more forms. Every one of those has different logins, and every one of those has different protocols. And all of those pots of money that we get require us to designate people, and in my case, again, there are only 2 of us, my business manager and myself, to have the permissions to use those systems, to apply for the money, and then report on the money, often in a different system. So I might apply for the money in one and have to report on it in another. And none of those are coordinated throughout the course of the year. They all come at different times. And they all come with maybe a memo that says it's time to do this as a reminder, and maybe not. And if you miss it, you don't get the money. So again, we're really grateful for the money. We need it. In my little building, we couldn't function without it. But the burdensome process and the number of administrative steps and red tape that we have to go through in order to access those funds and then report on those funds, and that doesn't account for any of the time that it takes to put the funds together in a way that we can then apply for it. So, for example, collecting all the data that we need in order to be able to apply. And so what I would say is in those larger districts like Livonia or Novi or Utica or Detroit or even at the larger ISDs, the process is identical for all of us regardless of the size. And those districts have entire offices and teams of people that do nothing but state and federal grants all day long. So they might assign each one of these pots to a different person, and that's the only thing that person has to think about. But in a small district, all of it comes to me and my business manager. So I just wanted to put that out there to show that there has to be a better way for schools to be able to receive the money that the legislature says, you know, we need and that you've approved for us. It's just the ways in which we can access it are so burdensome that often we miss the opportunities and can't actually access. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Greg, you want to go next?
Sure, happy to. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to meet with you here today. Appreciate this very much. My name is Greg Nean. I'm the superintendent for Marquette Algerisa. We are, of course, located in Marquette, Michigan. Our ISD spans about 3,000 miles. We have,
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can you maybe take the microphone and lean a little bit more to you? Sorry. Appreciate it.
Yep,
Sorry about
absolutely.
that.
So again, my name is Greg Nean, superintendent of Marquette Algerisa. Our ISD spans about 3,000 square miles. We have approximately 9,000 students and 700 licensed teachers in our area. We have school districts that are K-8, K-12 with as few as a dozen kids. We also have the largest LEA in the Upper Peninsula with Marquette Area Public Schools. So we have a real broad disparity among our LEAs. And some of the administrative burdens that my colleagues have mentioned and will mention are very real. I'd like to talk just for a moment or two about recruitment and retention. In the Upper Peninsula, we have fewer applicants, obviously, than rural, rather than the urban and suburban areas. And so recruitment and retention is a big need. And one of the talking points that I'd like to share today is when my generation considered education, I made a conscious choice to trade a private sector salary package for the knowledge and safety of having a state retirement. Over the last several decades, of course, that state retirement system has been watered down, it's been diminished, and so that has had a direct impact on young people's desire to get into education. You couple that with the significant increase in accountability and an overall public sentiment that has been somewhat anti-education, and it's no wonder that we have an educator shortage in this state. We have a couple of efforts that are ongoing in the state of Michigan. Currently, Talent Together is a concerted effort among 55 of the 56 ISDs. That's right, by the end of this calendar year, we will be one short of being a truly statewide effort. And that effort specifically is targeting the educator shortage by creating a pathway that will result in no educational loans for its teacher candidates, and in their final year of ed prep programming, they will be paid as a registered apprentice. So this is an incredible opportunity. Looking for some continued funding there. We have our first cohort already underway with 900 participants. We have over 1,100 participants signed up for cohort 2, and this is without doing any formal advertising. So we believe that as we put more emphasis and as we share this information statewide, that effort is only going to grow. It's a great effort. We are very thankful for this possibility. It is part of a short-term approach, and what I mean by that is we are largely working with the population of educational assistants or parapros, and those folks are already in the system. They're connected to classrooms, they have an affinity for students, they love the educational environment, but they're already working. And so if we look at their contribution over time, we're probably limited to about 15 years. So how do we cast forward and begin to look at some of the younger people and get them interested in public education? I think we have to go back to the retirement system overall, and it needs to be more lucrative to become a teacher. What does that mean? That means more competitive salaries, better benefits, stronger benefits, and a general respect or overall appreciation for the good and hard work that is being done every day in our classrooms. I'd like to switch topics just for a moment and say thank you so much for the 31N dollars that has been infused into the K-12 settings to address the mild and moderate level mental health needs. We still have a section of students that are at that Tier 3 level that have significant mental health needs, and these are the students that oftentimes are coming into schools, they're injuring staff members, they're injuring other students, they present as a significant safety risk. We don't currently have a mechanism to support that population, but we are still required to provide education to them day in and day out. Day treatment programming is an option that has been embraced by the states in the Midwest that surround us, Ohio, Wisconsin, Minnesota. We are trying to get day treatment programming established in the state of Michigan. There are a number of hurdles in our way. Certainly Medicaid funding and how we can fund this through a collaborative effort between DHHS and MDE is something that we really need your help on. But it's going to take your legislative help. And then finally, I'd just like to say, once again, I'm appreciative for the conversation. If you'd like to learn more about the rural perspective, of course, you're probably already all familiar with this document produced by David Arson, MSU. It's a great roadmap for policy. And again, thank you for your time.
And before we move on, I just wanted to thank Rep. Weiss for all of her work on Talent Together in the last budget cycle. Catherine?
Thank you, Matt. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for your time, and I really appreciate being here to speak with all of you. I'm Dr. Catherine Bertolini. I'm the superintendent of Maple Valley Schools, and we are right on the border of Berry and Eaton counties, about 38 miles southwest of here. So that's my district. Representative Johnson knows my neighborhood very well, so it's great to see you this morning. And I would like to speak with all of you about transportation. First, I must express my appreciation that it was in our budget as a specific line item this year. I'm absolutely thrilled about that. And I would like to tell you a little bit about Maple Valley and why that's such a critical piece for us. We have 911 students in our district, and they live over a span of about 86 square miles. So my district is geographically very large for a very small number of students. Some of the districts that you were mentioning, much more compact densities, so much less space to get all those children to school. In our area, it's a long stretch. Some of our kids are on bus about an hour to an hour and 20 minutes each way to get to and from school every day because they need to be on a route that is run once to service all three of our buildings. So we have a K2, a 3-6, and a 7-12 building, and the students all ride together. So we have to put them all in one route, one in the morning, one at night. What that does for us is it puts us in a position of gross inequity because over the last 5 years, my funding that goes to take care of my transportation department has run from 7.1% of my budget up to 8.5% of my entire budget. None of those dollars see my classrooms. None of those dollars make it to my classrooms. In last year, it's going to be even more extreme. It'll be well over 9% of my total budget because with the lack of bus availability, usually we buy 2 buses a year My bus fleet is quite old, so we maintain a full-time mechanic just to keep everything on the road and keep us from getting any red tags, which is prohibited to drive a bus if you have any red tags. So they keep our buses on the road, but we have very old buses because that's all we can afford. Usually each year we spend anywhere from $12,000 to $14,000 on buses. That doesn't sound like very much, but that gets us 2 5 to 6 year old buses that keep our fleet moving. In the last year, there were no buses available. No one was selling their buses in auction market because there were none available to replace them. So districts that typically replace on a 2-year, 3-year cycle were holding on to all of their buses. So there were no buses for us to find. We were forced to be in a position where we had to buy more recent buses. My transportation director was absolutely thrilled because he's like, Catherine, this took down the age of our fleet dramatically. He was thrilled, but that cost my district $120,000. So just in purchasing those 2 buses, that's put my transportation budget well over 9% last year. So it's just a staggering number to me. And even other rural districts, if they're smaller, they don't have that same issue. When you only have 911 students to help drive what our allocations are, it's really difficult to dedicate all of that fund knowing I'm not putting it in my classroom. So that's a huge piece for us. I would just echo, and I'm so glad you brought this, because the work that David Arson and his team did is excellent in terms of giving us some great models to think about what we do for transportation going forward. And I would just encourage you, keep looking at those, because this help this year is tremendous. I'm thrilled to have it. But also, I want to consider the need for special education funding with that transportation, because we have to contract our special ed transportation out to Dean Transportation to ensure that all those children's needs are met. And that's also a substantial portion of my budget. So last year alone, my small district paid $130,000 to Dean Transportation for special education transportation, in addition to our regular routes. We also need to think about bus drivers. I'm sure you've heard, because every district, I think, you all can nod and smile with me, friends. We all are facing a really challenging situation with bus drivers. It's very difficult to get them. Their days look different than a typical worker. They have to come in very, very early in the morning in all weather conditions. They drive, and they have a middle spot in their day where there's no work required of them. So they go home, they do other things, then they come back in the afternoon to drive again. So their days are very strange, and it's difficult to make that appealing for folks that want to drive. And so without enough drivers in our mix, it's very challenging. Because we now have the good news of kids returning to our buses. For a while, we had no kids riding buses because of the mask prohibition on buses, and there were a lot of parents driving drop-off pickup. Now they're back on our buses again, but our buses are running at capacity. We have 75 and 77 kids on a 77-passenger bus. Picture that for a second. That's 3 children to a seat. That's what our buses look like for an hour and 20 minutes a day, in the morning and in the afternoon. And that's because we don't have enough drivers to run additional routes. We have buses, but we don't have enough drivers to run those routes. So all of these things are compounded, of course. When you look at the financials, you look at the availability of bus drivers that are skilled, the requirements for their licensure is profound. It's not just a matter of, do you have a nice disposition and do you like children? You need to do an extensive amount of licensure to get the ability to drive those buses. So there's a lot of roadblocks, if you will, that get in our way in terms of having people become drivers. And we're underwriting all the costs of all their transportation training so that we can keep them, but keeping them is a challenge as well. So I just really wanted to let you know it's a multifaceted issue with transportation, and I really tremendously appreciate this opportunity to share it with you all today, and thank you again so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Good morning. I'm Katie Zenekas-Mikowski. I'm superintendent at Johannesburg Lewiston Area Schools. We're about 13 miles east of Gaylord. But I have a little bit of a different story. I graduated from Troy Schools, so I grew up in Southeast Michigan. I know what Southeast Michigan is. I was a senior during Proposal A and the teacher walkout. So I've had some experience with that. I have a sister who's a teacher in Chicago Public Schools and another sister who just moved from Brooklyn, New York to LA. So I have a bit of a perspective coming, and then I have a husband who was born and raised in Sheboygan, Michigan. So so it's a very different perspective. I have my season tickets to the Wharton Center, so I make sure I get my children some city experiences. But small town Michigan has got so much to offer. I know every kid that walks through that door every day. I know all of their names. I speak to all of my seniors, and I make sure they have a plan when they leave. So my colleagues have presented to you some major hurdles we have. The reporting, what Stephanie shared with you, I could give you a whole nother hour on. What Greg shared with you, and especially his ending on the mental health situation and the needs of these children coming in, I have never seen more special education needs walking into kindergarten than this year. I have brand new teachers, brand new aides, and children are coming in nonverbal. I have over 40% of a classroom with special ed in a kindergarten class. And hey, my special ed teacher resigned last week. I've got a posting out. I've got one applicant. My band teacher resigned the week before school started. I have no applicants, and I've been on the news to talk about that. So what Greg said about this educator shortage, it's real. It's here. I had 250 applicants for 9 jobs in 2009. So we're seeing a big shift. Transportation, yep, 300 square miles, 700 students. I know my buddy down in Riverview, 3 square miles, 7,000 students. Right, I mean, like, we could, there's lots of data to support that. Another piece to all of this is if I can find somebody to apply, where are they gonna live? I live in a small neighborhood on a little lake up in northern Michigan, not far from Garland, if you're a golfer and you've been up there. And my neighborhood has been turned over. I bought a house. It was less than $150,000 in 2014. Houses half that size in my neighborhood are going for over $300,000 now. We don't pay people enough to afford those kinds of homes in northern Michigan. And it's my neighborhood's pretty much Macomb County weekenders now. I've got them all. We have some great neighbors, but they don't send kids to school, and they don't bring the professionals to our area to help support our schools. I've got 2 subs in my sub pool, and one of them's working full time for us right now because we're short a staff member. So housing is a huge issue in all of our areas. I know you've seen property values go up in your areas. You can imagine it's the same up north. And Stephanie, I think she looked for a principal for over a year because they couldn't find an affordable house that anybody could move to. Thankfully, I have a couple board members who have rentals, and they'll hold them for teachers. But aside from that, we're starving for housing in northern Michigan. And then I have spoken multiple times on broadband access. I can't tell you the importance of that enough after having lived through COVID and trying to connect our people. Northeast Michigan, I don't have a signal on my Verizon phone in my 10-minute commute, guys. Like, we don't have service. Verizon is the best provider up where we're at, and there are so many holes. I dropped Matt a few times the other day on my drive. So broadband, internet, cell service, all of those things are critical to what we do anymore, and especially for us to be here, knowing that there is going to be a call at some point today about something that's probably going to be the construction that's 6 months behind on the new facility. So we have some pretty amazing things to offer. Small schools are great. Knowing every kid makes a huge difference. So I encourage you to come visit, because you can come by anytime.
Thank you. And as somebody who's visited several schools across our state at this point, I would love to take you up on that. It's interesting. I should have mentioned this beforehand. I actually taught at, I would say, a somewhat rural school. I taught at Carlton Airport, northern Monroe County, which is right on the cusp of the suburbs, basically. It's the first one kind of removed. And we had, the job I applied for had 64 applicants. The job I left had 4. And the job I applied for was dual certification. The one I left was just social studies. So yes, agree with you on the teacher shortage being very, very real. A lot of what you said, I think there's a lot of agreement here, but I know we do have some committee members who I believe in Salem, they have questions. Am I imagining that or no? Maybe I'm imagining. I'm just going with my questions if you guys don't. Okay. Okay, Representative Johnson.
Thank you. I'm so glad you brought up the reporting issue and what you mentioned. If I'm not mistaken, excuse me, it's part of the exhaustion of the teachers, the admin, and the reason for a teacher shortage. One of the many reasons for a teacher shortage and early retirement. But can you comment on, you mentioned all the reporting just for the finances. Can you comment on, you have reporting for parents, for fellow teachers, the public, communication, grades, counseling, and all the recruitment and retention, correct?
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. So I was a teacher as well for 20 years before I became an administrator, and I'm old. So I've been doing this since the late 80s, and the difference between what is required of teachers and administrators today versus what was required in the Stone Ages when I started in Flint, where I grew up, is it's a completely different job now. Teachers are required to update their grade books. Parents would expect it every day. Most of us have policies that are asking for those at least once a week. Whether there's meaningful feedback to provide via the gradebook or not, parents expect it. There's reporting for the counselors. There's reporting for I can't even go into the pupil accounting. There was, when I first started as an administrator, a registrar was responsible for things like making certain the transcripts were accurate and getting to colleges. That I have a person now full time who does nothing but pupil accounting and counseling reporting, state testing reporting. There was a time in which we used to talk about teachers, and myself included. There was this sort of this avalanche of we're just going to ask you to do this one more thing, and then we're going to do one more thing, and then we're going to do one more thing, and the one more thing became the majority of their time. I can guarantee you that we have staff and administrators, myself included, who spend more time on compliance, reporting, and counting things than we do on the actual work of education. I'm an instructional leader, and the majority of my job as a superintendent now is on management. And I think we've gone in the wrong direction with just a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. Because that little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more turns into the stuff nobody went into teaching because they wanted to fill out reports. I have to have a full-time communications person now. I have 430 kids, and I have a person that I now pay on my staff to do extra duty to do all the communications for our district, because the expectation now is immediate information. Everybody wants it right now. In a large school, you can hire a communications director. In a small school, it becomes a Scheduled B teacher who likes to use social media. Maybe an administrator who wants to do a newsletter. But then I also have, in my little town of Leland, we have a fantastic and supportive tradition of community members. Our school is the hub of our community. Most of my people who live in the community are retirees, so they're 65 and older. They want to know what's going on, but they still want a paper newsletter, a printed copy in their mailbox. Well, the cost of that is excessive, but then having somebody to put all of that together is also another burdensome requirement. So yes, teachers, counselors, principals, all of us are spending an inordinate amount of time, again, in a small and rural specifically, because larger districts can hire people to do this and keep it off the plate of the admin and off the plate of the classroom teachers. But in a small school, it lives on their plate, lives on all of our plate.
I'd like to piggyback on what Stephanie just shared too, because we're looking at the cusp of adding more to that plate, right? If that FAFSA bill passes, guys, who's going to be responsible for that? Yeah. And not only that, do you know how many students that would impact whose parents don't want to provide the information? That's not equitable for kids. So that piece, evaluations have taken a huge shift in our careers. I was a classroom teacher for 10 years. I've spent the next 15 in administration. And There are definite pros and cons. We've got some great rubrics out there that are providing administrators with tools for evaluation. And I don't know that they'll all agree with me, but I'll say to you, we don't need data on there. Or it needs to be a district choice where we can use some growth data to show that students are growing. Those are the pieces we need to be looking at, not those one-day, one-shot tests.
Okay, couple things there. First of all, we used to jokingly, when I was teaching, we called the beginning of your PD that was the one more thing meetings, because it was always, oh, the state's got one more thing for you, one more thing.
We
one
called
more
them the
thing.
blue binder meetings.
Yep.
Here's another blue binder.
Yep. I remember those days well. I have a question. This might be a Maple Valley question too. When you are a district that is small, rural area, and yet you are in somewhat close proximity to districts that are much larger, chances are those districts that are much larger just have the ability to potentially pay their educators a lot more. Have you found, especially with the 401k system where things are a lot more mobile, have you found that you have lost teachers to nearby districts that just simply are able to pay more?
We absolutely have. There's been a lot of outward migration from us because getting teachers to us, there was a history when probably 60% of our staff were alumni of our school district and they came home to teach. That's changed. And there's been a much more intense push from my neighboring district. Charlotte's taken many of my teachers. My first year I was a superintendent there 6 years ago. My entire 5th and 6th grade went as a team over to Charlotte, and I lost them all, and largely due to finance, and I wasn't able to match. With ESSER, we've been able to do some things, but that's not sustainable. So, all of that era of retention incentives and things that I could do to close the gap a little bit, that's coming to an end. So a lot of the work we've done is try to build sustainable work. We're close to matching that, but again, you have to make sacrifices somewhere else. This is why transportation is such a passion for me, because I think all the time, what could I do with $1 million? I could do a lot of things in a $14.5 million budget with $1 million to take care of that gap with my teacher pay, because I do lose teachers to Hastings, to Charlotte, and that's only 20 minutes. But the housing comes into that as well, because a lot of my teachers are driving an hour to get to work in the morning, and they're driving an hour to get home in the evening. And so when the district that they live in can offer them $15,000 more a year, I'm going to lose that all day long. And I get my young teachers that I train up beautifully for the first 4 years of their practice, but as they develop relationships and start their families, they go, Catherine, I love it here, my heart is here, but I need some time with my own children. And how do I argue with that? So the housing, it's a multifaceted challenge of keeping teachers in rural districts, because they need somewhere to live, so they're willing to stay. The cost of living tends to be better in our area. So, that's an advantage for us over larger metropolis areas, but I need somewhere for them to live so that they'll stay. And so, Holland did a really great thing. I don't know if you saw the news, but they're giving an amazing teacher incentive, $25,000 incentive to live within 15 miles of their district boundaries. And if they live in district, $2,500 in closing costs. I'm talking with the Berry Community Foundation right now to say, what can we do? Because Berry County is a county that you can have a mortgage with zero down, but I would want to get the closing costs for my teachers. So I am constantly thinking about things. How can I make my area attractive enough that I can retain those teachers? And I think putting them in a home they can afford goes a long way, because it is more affordable housing for us if we have them, but we don't have them. So I hope
Thank
that
you.
answers your
Yeah,
question.
it does. Thank you. Representative Churches.
Thank you all for taking the time to be here this morning and share your expertise and your experiences. So something that you said about teachers' plates, administrators' plates, it really resonated with me. At a professional development 2 years ago, it was August, and all the teachers in the cafeteria at the middle school got a paper plate. And we were supposed to write all the things that we felt were on our plate. And on the back of the plate, we were supposed to prioritize one thing that we wish our district would help take off our plate. At the time, the thing I wanted taken off my plate was Planbook EDU, which was where I had to write the Common Core learning statement and the share, the learning target, the lesson, and the outcome for every single subject, 6 preps a day for 5 days a week. And I could transfer them, but like it wasn't beneficial to me. It was just a lot of busy work. And it was disrespectful to me as an educator. And that was one teeny little tick. And what I'm hearing from you is that your plate might look different. And the sad part of that was when I was a teacher, I never thought like, oh, I want to be a politician. But one of the reasons I became a politician was because of that plate that society creates for teachers. Teachers, educators, people in education have to have their plate full of everything that our legislature fails to address head on, because then you are left to deal with it for us. And I hear you today expressing the needs of what you need us to work on and prioritize in our work. And I just want to thank you for that. And if there was one thing, I don't know if you could have a consensus at your table today, but if there's one thing that we could take off of your plate, or if we could prioritize as a legislature, what would you say that would be?
You know, one of the things that I really resented when I was a classroom teacher was the implication that all of this administrative jockeying, the implication of that was that I wasn't a professional and I couldn't be trusted to do my job. And I have the same reaction as a superintendent. There has to be a better way, and I will tell you from my perspective as a super now for 4 years, the funding model for schools is broken. I don't need 70 different pots of money that I have to apply for individually and account for. Give us the money.
And compete.
And compete for, which I can never win because there's only, we're too small. Give us the money. We know what to do with it. I think we've proven that. And if there is a problem with an individual district, then work with the individual district. But to hamstring all of us to the degree that I have to beg, borrow, and steal for every single improvement that we want to make in the building. And the inordinate amount of time and like you said, wasted energy to prove that we're professionals and that we can do our jobs. I'm all about accountability. Don't get me wrong. I was accountable as a classroom teacher, and I was resentful of my peers at the time who weren't. I get it. And I'm accountable as an administrator as well. But our kids deserve professionals who have the time and the energy to spend on helping them develop and grow. And so much of that time is diverted on this process. Administrivia. Thank you. That is the word.
I heard multiple.
That would be key for me.
Of you said respect somewhere in what you said, and I think that goes a long way to that piece, right? Like it's just the respect for our profession that has caused all of these little pieces to happen, and then we're left with accountability. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be accountable. Accountability plays a role in all facets of the world. However, trusting that the accountability is taking place versus making sure that I've got every receipt to back up every expense on that report is a different piece, right? So we have auditors come in, they audit that. But for me to spend, it's going to take me probably a full work day of non-interrupted time. My office is in the high school. It's awesome though, because that's how you see kids, right? When I get bogged down in these reports, I get up and I go to a classroom.
Same.
Right? Because that's what we do. That's why we do. So I'd have to go with all these competitive pieces and all those pots. Oftentimes, and my peanut gallery back there would echo this. We just need one funding piece and let us figure out how we need to spend it. We've got it. We know what we need to do.
Want us to trust you that you're professionals and that you are going to use the money to invest in your district the way that your district needs.
Exactly.
Flexibility.
Thank you, Representative.
Yeah, I would absolutely concur with my colleagues here. What you've heard from us today is really testimony around the pain and suffering associated with the administration of public education. If we had a system where resources were sufficient to meet the needs of each respective district, we would be up here talking about educating students rather than administering the requirements of a State Department. We haven't talked at all about assessments or curriculum or programs for youth. We're talking about administration and the incredible number of barriers that are placed between providing a world-class education to every student in the state of Michigan rather than playing the lottery zip code. If you are in a rural and urban area or a urban and suburban area, you're going to have greater resources. But yet 80% of the school districts are rural in Michigan. Only 20% of the kids are in those districts, but still 80% of us represent that segment of the population. And so, you know, again, going back to this MSU study, we've touched on all of the tenets of that. They were briefly recruitment and retention, behavioral health, broadband funding, and state reporting. So I think our message has been consistent with what this study outlined. And again, appreciate the fact that you are asking these questions and taking the time to hear us today.
And I heartily concur with my colleagues, and to answer your question, exactly that. We are not all apples and oranges. You know, the communities you described look so different than my community, and we know locally what our needs are in our districts. So I often feel frustrated when I'll see a funding opportunity and I shrug because either I don't have the time to write the grant to get it done, or I say, well, that doesn't quite fit who we are, but I still need that funding stream for this, this, or this. But because they are so tailored, so tightly for accountability purposes, we lose out on a lot of those. So that big pot of money request is valid for Maple Valley as well, because we're not the same. And I think that would benefit all of our districts across the state, but particularly those of us who have very finite resources to get a lot of work done with limited human capital to implement that work. So I agree.
Well, with all this talk of funding, the next person asking a question is perfect. The chair of K-12 Appropriations, Representative Weiss.
Thank you for that segue. And I do have I have a question about funding, but I actually have a policy question too, because I know one of the areas of focus right now in the legislature on the policy side is around teacher evaluation and reforming our teacher evaluation system. You've heard it from a lot of us. A lot of us were teachers, so we've been through the song and dance. We know what it's like. We know how much time we spend. I think one time I calculated, and I don't remember the exact number at this point, but the amount of time that I spent administering tests, not teaching to the test or anything like that, just like literally just giving a test to students. It was weeks of instructional time, multiple weeks of instructional time that was spent administering tests. And this was at the high school and middle school level. And so, I totally hear you, and I hear, because I felt it too, and I think we all felt it. And I think that's a lot of the reason why a lot of us are where we are today is because of that frustration. And so with the teacher evaluation system, you spend a lot of time talking about the amount of time spent having to work on reports and check boxes, and just the level of feeling like you're not respected as a professional because you have to prove that you're, effective, or maybe highly effective, hopefully not minimally effective. And so just from your perspectives, what would that look like to you? Like an ideal teacher evaluation system as we're working through that process. And then if you allow me, I have a budget follow-up question.
That's a really interesting question, because it does put us in a precarious conversation. I actually met with my union leadership, and we have a great relationship. I truly believe in the rubric that we're using in our district and how it has really helped coach up some teachers. It's been phenomenal. And we've been able to, you know, have that highly effective pool over here and not worry so much. The issue we have is that data piece. And requiring that state data, as I'm talking to the teachers and preaching to the choir, what I'm saying to you is one test doesn't give you an answer. I'm in full support of the NWEA growth assessment. We have implemented it. It gives you that, yeah, it's triannual assessment. But if we could take that M step off the plate and replace it, that would be phenomenal. It would be the less time giving tests, gives you growth data. Are you making a difference for that student? And then let each district collaborate on their needs. I hear that some districts tied a merit pay to highly effectiveness. That was what my union leadership said the issue was. We don't do that in our district. We tie it to being effective in general. So I think that there is work to be done. I also know that my administrators spend a whole lot of time on that. And so coming up with a system that maybe could alleviate some of that time would be helpful as well.
Yeah, and I think just overall, when you look at, you know, the bill that's currently in the Senate, I think that's the big key point for our members is just, you know, will it reduce the burden on administering them and on going through the process? And also, part of that bill is administrator evaluation. So that is another part of it as well. I think it kind of gets lost a little bit. So when we're talking about that bill, just try and keep in mind from our perspective, you know, does this provision make sense? Will it simplify you know, our job? One provision that's in the bill that I believe we all are very supportive of is if you've been rated, whatever the top category will be renamed as 3 years in a row, then you only have to be evaluated once every 2 or 3 years. Like, that's a win-win for all parties involved. On the other hand, right now there's a provision that would require mediation for whatever, again, it keeps changing, but whatever the one of the lowest rating is would require non-binding mediation. And I think from our perspective, we're not sure the value of that, and we're worried that, again, that would just kind of add one more thing to our administrator's plate.
And I would add that, you know, as a classroom teacher, the most meaningful evaluations that I ever received were from administrators with whom I had a trusting relationship. And the legislation in 2011, which, well-intentioned as it may have been, maybe, created an us versus them perspective. And I think it eroded whatever chance we had of providing meaningful coaching around a trusting relationship. Because regardless of what rubric we use, regardless of how many hoops we have to jump through, boxes we have to check, scores that we assign with a number, which is so insulting, if it's not grounded in a meaningful, trusting relationship between an administrator and a teacher, it's just compliance. So I'm a huge fan of a coaching model. Cognitive coaching is a fantastic model. Adaptive schools is a fantastic model. If we could get to a point where we say, as we do with all the other professionals in the world, that we trust our management to recognize those who are doing a high quality job, and we trust our management to coach those who are struggling, and we trust our management to identify who might be better served in a different profession, and we treat it as that, I think our issues around evaluation dissolve. Right now, what I think we're trying to do is fix a model that was faulty from the beginning. And we're band-aiding it, as opposed to saying, let's rethink this entire model and come up with something that honors the professionalism of the people in the room and their ability to work together to improve their performance for students. Because the model we have doesn't do any of that.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more on that. So thank you for that. The budgetary question I had, one of the things that we did this year that this legislature did for the first time was to provide dedicated funding for student transportation. I know you mentioned transportation being a huge issue. I think I know this legislature, we spent a lot of time talking about equity and trying to push towards equity. And I think a lot of people, when they hear that, they think urban districts. You're talking about urban districts, which in a lot of cases you are, but we're really also talking about rural districts. And so that transportation piece in particular, we know was important for rural districts. Can you talk a little bit about what you anticipate? I know that we're just starting this budget year, but what you anticipate some of the impacts are going to be from that dedicated transportation funding.
The joyful is I get to put it back in my classrooms. So, I'm very happy that we'll find my classrooms more often, because that is a key piece. I think the special ed portion is very important as well, because we have two transportation funding streams. So that fully funding of special education becomes important for us as well, because that comes back to my general fund, when I have those funds dedicated as well. But my hope is, and I'm excited to find out how much it is. I mean, we still don't know. I ask my CFO all the time, what are we looking at here? And he's like, not sure yet, Catherine, be patient, because I can't figure out how to reallocate until I know exactly what the benefit is going to be. But my hope is that we're able to bring that back to classroom, work on other programs. There's a tremendous amount of work we need to do with curriculum development. In rural schools, it's very difficult for me to find $65,000 to buy, new curriculum base for us to work from. That's just not a chunk of funds I have sitting, waiting for me to spend. And so I'm very hopeful I will be reallocating a lot of those things to my curriculum and how we're getting the teachers the professional development they need to maximize any curriculum or build their own, because that's my thing. I think our teachers are professional enough to build their own to our standards, but I want to give them that time and support financially to have that professional growth that everyone was talking about, and I heartily concur, by the way, on evaluations, because we've got to take the fear factor out of doing our jobs as educators. And evaluation has done nothing but drive fear into their hearts and drive people from our profession, frankly. So I think is an important piece of work to keep people coming in and then supporting them. Those transportation dollars will give me more flexibility to do those things. So I hope that answers your question.
I also think on the transportation side of things, just here's the example. 2 years ago, I bought a bus. It was $89,000. This year, I went to buy the same bus. It was $156,000.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm sorry, you go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Rep. Weiss, your comment is on point for the entire Upper Peninsula. When you talk about student sparsity per mile, it's not any more underscored than it is in the Upper Peninsula. And so the money that has been subsidized by the Gen Ed budget to support transportation will be able to remain in the Gen Ed portion of the budget. And that's what we need to really make a difference in terms of student achievement and providing opportunities for our students.
And I think one of the things about this formula that we have yet to see that's going to allocate these dollars is typically when we come up with these pots of money, the allocation is based on pure pupil as sort of like the first variable. And I think in this, the variable has to be square mileage. It just does, because I think I heard one of our fellow superintendents talk about the number of miles that the buses in Alpena drive every day is to Orlando, Florida and back. Mm-hmm. Every day on their bus fleet. It just has to consider things beyond the cost of just the bus. It has to consider how many square miles does your district have? How many routes do you need in order to do that? How long does a student have to spend on a bus? And I'll just say, in Leland, if I have a student, and I had one last year, a kindergartner who needed a center-based program for cognitive impairment, the bus arrived at his house at 6:15 in the morning. He was 5 years old, to get to school by 8 o'clock. And then he had to turn around at the end of the day and do it again as a 5-year-old. So I think we have to factor those things like mileage and routes and time.
And don't forget, the type of road you drive on matters, right? Mm-hmm. So all those dirt roads that I drive down affect buses a whole lot differently.
Okay, we have 3 questions left, and I'm just, because obviously we do want to be time sensitive, so I want to make sure we keep moving along here. So Representative Paquette out in Zoom.
completely agree with regard to anyone who looks at the school aid budget, all those numbers and all the funds that you have to apply for. Yeah, there's a lot to that. So understanding how those dollars actually get allocated or don't, and the cumbersome process is key. I know there's a lot of work that was done on the committee the last couple of years about rolling some of those line items into the foundation allowance. But yeah, I think probably every person on the committee here too is amenable to trying to figure out how to simplify some of that. But so when I started teaching, I was at Benton Harbor. They gave me a box of pencils and Kleenex and said, go teach Spanish. And, I did, kept my head down, tried to be as positive as possible, especially with the challenges. One of my colleagues at my other district had a raccoon under her trailer when she was teaching Spanish in, and, it's challenging. But, my staff that I got to work with was blessed for a time to work with a very positive staff and really focus on what is good. So I'd just be curious if you guys could highlight some of the fantastic things that are happening in your districts briefly, for kids, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'd like to just take a moment and again circle back to day treatment programming. So we have been successful in securing a Michigan Health Endowment Fund grant for Marquette Algerisa. We've formed a partnership with one of our mental health providers. Excuse me. And we are in the process of setting up a pilot program that will address the needs of a small but significant population of students in which they will receive their education in a co-located setting with mental health providers. So as behavioral incidents become problematic, there will be a very seamless transition where there will be a mental health therapist on site that will be able to work through that issue or the need with the particular student and help them to generalize a coping skill that will eventually allow them to be able to transition safely back into the general population. So what this pilot is intended to do is to create a model where we can collect some efficacy data and come back to the State Department of Education, the Department of Health and Human Services, and hopefully the legislature, and ask for this model to be scaled up across the state, because we have a significant population of students in the state of Michigan. They are, unfortunately, many times the ones who are in headlines. They are the ones that incur significant costs for districts, either in the supports necessary or in the harm done to staff members. And this is a significant need, and I'm happy to say that we are moving forward with the solution in our region.
And I'm thinking you want to hear more like give me some boots on the ground stories about kids. We're bringing back CTE courses with a little bit more flexibility in that Michigan Merit curriculum where we can decide what each kid needs. So we have a new shop class that's got enrollment coming out the window, and we have a $22 million bond project going on that is going to put in a field house with 3 gyms, an indoor track, and an auditorium. An auditorium. These kids have never seen an auditorium. So that is huge, and it's been a very heavy lift administratively, but we're making it happen. And there are great things happening, and that's why I said you got to visit classrooms. You got to visit classrooms.
Yes. I have 11 of my juniors and seniors are semifinalists in the American Legion Essay Contest. So I was celebrating that this week, which is phenomenal. We had 2 runners-up also, so I'm very proud of my students. And my FFA students are going down to the National FFA Convention. I don't know if any of you have ever participated in an FFA situation similar to that, but if you ever get a chance to check out the national conference, you should go. It can only be held in 3 cities in America because they have to be large enough to have a conference capacity to house the 40 to 60,000 kids that come from across America to learn all things FFA. And when you go to those competitions and see the extemporaneous speaking and the leadership that FFA fosters in our youth, it is inspiring. They're talking about blockchain analysis and logistics, and they get 15 minutes to prep for a speech, and they will give you a speech that will sit you back in your chair in awe because they are so skilled. And it's just a phenomenal experience. Our kids always go to the FFA National Convention. We always make sure we send our officers, and it's just a thrill to see those children perform at that level because it's just fantastic. So I'm very proud of our FFA chapter in our district as well.
We have this really fantastic partnership right now with Finland. So we just hosted 10 students and 3 adults from Finland who have been partnering with we have 8 students in our building and 3 adults who are partnering on a forestry conservation project. So because we live in the beautiful Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore, we were able to send our team, our students and the Finnish students into the National Lakeshore for tours with forest ranger and learn about old growth forest and new growth. We were able to send them to Archangel Gabriel Tree Preserve that works to preserve old trees that are, what's the word I want? I just lost the word. Historic trees that are no longer around. They work to harvest the cells and propagate these trees. Our students are currently fundraising. They'll be going to Finland in the spring for that share. So we're working really hard to give our tiny little town kids a global perspective. We're an international baccalaureate world school at the elementary level. And so global citizenship is part of our work. And our kids, many of whom have never been out of our county, have these fantastic opportunities to travel. So we're really thrilled for them.
I love seeing the pride on all your faces when you talk about this. Seriously, I don't think there's anybody in the education world that doesn't love showcasing what their kids are doing. So thank you for sharing all that, and thank you for the question, Rep. Paquette. Representative Glanville.
Thank you. And I'll keep it brief. I have a comment, a little bit more than a question. So a couple of things that I just wanted to lift up that I've heard you talking about. And just to give you a little perspective on my background, I have worked in schools as large as like 2,200 kids and then 300 kids. So I love the small school. I hear exactly what you're saying about that. The value is, you can't describe it. You have to live it, right? It's fantastic. But I've been in urban settings, and I've worked in public and non-public schools. And so a couple of things I wanted to lift up that I've heard you talking about is the coaching model and how important that is. The flexibility, having worked in an IB school as well, that piece of how you can, and this was in a non-public, so we were able to flex our schedule to accommodate the kind of learning and teaching that goes into an IB program, right? And when I hear each of you talking about the different trips and programs and things that you have going on, the idea of this, this seat time rule that we have, it's just, again, it's one more thing that cuts off your ability to create the best environment for learning in your school, in your setting. I mean, how much time do kids have to go out and study these old growth trees? And, which is something that's, specific to your area, and is something that, you might not need in another school. But where does that fit in? And again, I think about the seat time stuff. I want to just draw another point around the data review. I've been on data review teams. I've been on accreditation teams. And data review, I've always felt very sorry for the teachers who have to collect that stuff. But so I just really want to put a point on this, isn't this idea of flexibility. And I think that's where we need to move, because not only is it disrespectful to our teachers, to our administrators, it is disrespectful to our students when we force this testing model on them, particularly our secondary students. Like it seems like, kids come in, they love elementary school, they have such a great time, and we get them to middle school and high school where they have to start doing this, this just sit in your chair and do the thing, and they lose it, right? And we often look to the elementary level, and I'm a little biased because I taught secondary, but I mean, we tend to finesse those programs, I think, first at the bottom, which is great, but we kind of forget about our kids at the end. And that's where we see so much drop off, right, in their enthusiasm and completion and all the things. So I really appreciate you coming here today. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedules, sacrificing the work you have to do at home. And I truly hope that we can come to some real changes. I have some ideas.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Stone.
Right, that if documentation hasn't provided data to show that it's the cause of improvement, then we need to be able to agree that we can drop that away and find ways to do that. I think we kind of have gotten at the passion that came out of creating meaning and exploration, and that if you ask anyone what was the most meaningful learning experiences, it will never be a textbook, it will never be a test. It was some project that created meaning for them. It was some exploration, field experience, and I think that's what trusting educators creates. It creates that science atmosphere where you are a creator and you're developing opportunities for our students, and you're giving teachers space to be creative again. And I hope that's our big takeaway on top of all the meaningful insights you provided. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank all of you for coming in and sharing what's going on in your districts. You know, when I was in education, I used to always say, why doesn't anybody ask those who are there about what to do? So when I became chair, the most important thing was to ask those who are there. And so to that end, I want to thank all of you to come in. It sounds like we've got a willingness on both sides of the aisle here that we want to attack a lot of these issues you've brought forth and find solutions. And rest assured, we'll be asking about when we are brainstorming solutions to these, we're going to want your input. So I just want to thank you all again for being here. And did you have
Well, I was
some-
just going to say we have 11 more superintendents in the back.
I saw a lot of nodding and agreement behind you all, so I assumed as much. But I want to thank all of you for being here then, and I know you have meetings throughout the day with legislators, and I wish you well in those meetings, and hopefully a lot of good conversations. So with that, we are wrapping up here. I believe we have all members on Zoom, so there are no absent members, and there being no further business before the committee will stand adjourned. Thank you, everyone.